We'll open the session for questions now and discussions with the panel.
Good morning. Yeah, this question is for Ms. Bray. And my name is Murali Ramaswamy. I'm a physician in Greensboro, North Carolina, and part of the Care Center Network. Your talk was really, touched my heart. And we work closely with the big support group, and it's only through the support group we're able to get patients for our trials. Most patients in our practice who are not part of the support group are not, don't participate in trials. And we find the support group voice to be very important for the trials. However, we think that sponsors don't listen to the voice of the patient as much as they should. Examples would be 6-minute walk tests, would also be patient exclusion 5 years after diagnosis. The other would be CT scans, and that's a really frustrating part. I just wanted to share with you and see if you had any thoughts about that. Thank you.
So I think there's a couple things. Since you have patients and you are engaging them, even if a sponsor isn't formally, coming to you and doing a structured type of dialogue, you could do that yourself and take the protocol and then walk through the protocol with your patient group and then take that feedback. It would be way better to have the sponsor being, more holistic and integrating that as they're developing the protocol. But the trial I was in, any patient would have looked at it and said, only the most desperate who get forced into this will participate. And it's no surprise that it was, aborted for low and slow enrollment. So you're actually doing them a favor. But I think, you also have the opportunity sometimes to say no, which is also not the best option, and say, there's not enough benefit here, there's too many risks. What's the value for participating? There should be a value even if you're in the control group and you're getting a placebo or standard of care, and that can be what we call informational incentives and learning about your disease. I think Dave spoke about that very nicely, where it's an opportunity to learn more about your health. If there's none of that, you probably don't want to bring the protocol to your site and actually open up your patients to it, honestly. So I think it takes everybody in this room, starting to say, this is the way we do trials, this is the way we involve patients. Like National Breast Cancer Coalition, they will not actually, put forth trials if the patients weren't involved in the co-design of the actual protocol and the trial participant experience.
Thank you. We have another question in the middle front.
More of a comment than anything else. Thank you very much, Dr. Bray, Bray, for your import, for your presentation. I actually have been in through 3 clinical trials with Dr. Ramaswamy, so you have put into words a lot better than I ever could a lot of my feelings. So thank you for that. Second, with Dr. Ragu, one of the things he mentioned about the home-based spirometry, which I have one and used. And the only question I had for him on that, and he can catch up with me later, I can catch up with him, is was it based on the equipment? Was it based on the PFT technique? And in other words, why you mentioned that, because he said that's something that's experimental at this point. And I understand it is. And we can take that up later, but that's really it. And thank you, Bray, very much.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So I think what you're referring to is the trial that Ganesh quoted that was published a few weeks ago in Lancet Respiratory Medicine, where the primary endpoint, and I don't know if Toby's still here, but he can probably speak to this better than I can even, used home spirometry as the primary endpoint. And the problem that arose was that a single daily breath or daily blow was required. And though these machines have a safeguard in them that allows variability outside the normal range to be detected, you have to have several blows throughout the course of the day in order to detect that variability. And out of concern for patient comfort and not being too invasive in their lives, only one blow was required, and so that those sort of safeguards couldn't be employed. And so when the data went to be evaluated, a lot of these high variability out-of-range scores were not appreciated when they were being obtained, but they were on the back end when the data analysis happened. And so For that reason, that trial did not meet its primary endpoint, although had very compelling data with regard to the secondary endpoints. And so I think the point Ganesh was making was that this may not be ready for prime time, but it's certainly a promising potential primary endpoint down the road.
And I would guess that if the sponsor had gotten patients together when they were designing the protocol, you know, the patients might have said, look, yeah, it's not fun to do spirometry, but you know what? We're willing to do 2 blows or 3 blows and make sure that there's less variability there.
So thank you very much for all the information that you've given. Really appreciate it. There's a couple things that are, you know, that my wife in particular has gone through that I just kind of want to get your opinions on. So one of them is she was diagnosed, and the 5-year limit from diagnosis, you know, to be as an exclusion factor has, you know, made her so she can't really participate anymore. And we've talked to several people around here, but you know, about that kind of being an antiquated, you know, measure for exclusion. And so I'd like some, you know, just like your opinion on how to change that. And the second thing is she was participating in a trial that was stopped, and it's a small company. It was stopped because I think they've run low on funding and everything. I'm sorry, it ended in any case, but it's been very frustrating because they have positive results, and you know, she was on the open label extended, you know, thing. Again, people are going to be, you know, if the company doesn't honor their agreements to continue this, you're going to have fewer participants. And so again, I just sort of like your opinions on how to affect change for both of those sorts of things.
So I don't have an answer, but I can definitely share your frustration because I have the same concern myself. Being diagnosed in 2006, I'm way beyond the 5-year time that I've seen on almost all trials in the inclusion and exclusion criteria. So I have the very same question as you, and maybe one of my panelists might be able to expand on that.
I think one sort of beacon of light in this whole process recently is engagement by the NIH to have more inclusive trials and more pragmatic study designs. The cleanup trial, which just completed, I think is a good example of that, where those sort of limitations that you mentioned were not in place. And as we saw with the trial, enrollment finished early because it was such an inclusive trial and so easy for patients to participate in it. And so I think that provides us with a potential path forward in being more inclusive in our trial design, perhaps using composite endpoints which allow for lower sample sizes because you're going to have an increased event rate, and other ideas that just try to get around those issues that you just raised.
I want to add, so I think the foundation has a real opportunity to take in your perspectives and come up with a guidance for sponsors that are going to operationalize clinical trials. And so having your input on kind of the social contract and what your expectations are, it becomes almost a good housekeeping seal of approval that you're doing your trials to these standards. And, you know, so while trials do end, you know, I think you can suggest that you want the open label and the ability to continue, and you want, you know, sponsors to think of these things in advance about what would create value for people over time. And then I think that would also just help, like, there's a lot of variability. There are some companies in here that have very rich and robust patient engagement programs, and they've got people that know how to do this. And then you'll have, you know, some small biotech or some startup that has never engaged patients before. And so I think helping them navigate that upfront with your perspectives and expectations would be really useful.
Hi, my question is for Dave Sherry. Did you say that the last trial that you were in, that phase 3, showed promise for reversing fibrosis?
Yes, that's the, from what I recall many years ago, what attracted me to it initially. that in a lab setting, there was a reversal of fibrosis being noted.
Would you be able to tell us the name of that trial and the status?
Well, it was at the time it was known as the FG3019 trial by Fibrogen, yes. And it's the trial that is now in phase 3. I'm still very enthused, from a patient's perspective, I'm still very enthused about the development of that drug. I think the potential for drastically improving patients' quality of life is there.
In the interest of time, we'll take one more question before we wrap up.
Good morning. Oh, sorry. I'm a patient who has pulmonary fibrosis as well. I'm also a physical therapist. I'm very excited to hear your dismay in the 6-minute walk test. I think it's ridiculous. I've had it done so many times. Every time I'm told to do something different, my directions are different, the track is different. I challenge you as researchers, as respiratory therapists, to come up with a better solution. I think it would be a great research study. I would love to be part of it. I think there's a better way to measure. I would like to see it used with ADLs, what we do every day, maybe going up and down stairs, maybe cooking, something more practical than walking 6 minutes with different directions every time.
Okay, yes, yes. Everybody
you.
get on your feet. The company that I work at now, basically, we measure health in everyday life, and that means you can use accelerometry, you can use actigraphy, you can see the patient's heart rate, respiration, but what we try to do is create these novel digital measures that basically you're following the patient throughout the day, and then you can actually use new methods where the 6-minute walk is basically peak periods of activity on multiple days. Like some of this data is in what we call time series data. It's in 5-second intervals instead of every month or every 3 months when you come into the clinic. So it's in process. And I think, Jeff, I don't know if you can speak to this, but we're working on it. It's going to be a ways before these traditional measures just completely fall away, but they will over time. So there may be a time when actually you're asked to wear, an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or something, and then you're still asked to come into the clinic and do the 6-minute walk test. But I couldn't agree more, and a lot of trials, I think, are actually failing to meet their endpoint because of that variability. You cannot, it's a performance measure, and it doesn't matter whether you were coached or whether it was flat or whether, how long it was. You just can't, it's a lot of risk in trials, and so we really do need to find these more objective measures in everyday life. You want to add to that?
I don't think so.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, agree. Yeah, I think, the important thing that we have to remember is, as Bray mentioned, yeah, it's easy to say, oh, well, just give everybody an Apple Watch or give everybody a cell phone or track the data. And yeah, those are more real-world data, but we also want to scientifically assess that and know what the heck they're telling us, right? What does it actually mean as we collect those data? And that's going to take a bit more work.